I was reborn on the day my parents destroyed my life. Standing in the marble lobby of our family estate, I watched my father's hand rest on Mary's shoulder with the same pride I had craved for 28 years. The memory was so vivid it felt like yesterday. Yet I had lived an entire lifetime since this moment. In my previous life, I had stood here at 19, hopeful and naive, waiting to hear which of us would inherit the family business my grandfather built. Back then, I thought hard work mattered. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought being the eldest son carried weight. I was wrong about everything. The words that came next had killed me slowly in my first life. This time, hearing them again felt like watching a recorded tragedy where I already knew the ending. We've made our decision, my father announced, his voice carrying that corporate tone he used when closing deals. Mary will take over Henderson Industries. My sister's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth in mock surprise, but I saw the triumph gleaming in her eyes. She had practiced that expression in the mirror. I knew because in my previous life, she had confessed it to me years later while drunk at a charity gala, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate our parents. But David worked so hard, my mother said softly, though her hand was already reaching to comfort, Mary, not me. Sweetheart, you understand, don't you? Mary has the charm, the social connections. You're brilliant with numbers, but business needs a face, people trust. A face, people trust. In my previous life, those words had carved themselves into my soul. I had spent the next 9 years trying to prove myself, working 80-hour weeks as Mary's assistant, watching her run the company into the ground while taking credit for every idea I generated. I had died at 28 of a stress-induced heart attack in my office, alone, still trying to save the business she was destroying. Nobody came to my funeral. They were all at Mary's engagement party. Now, standing here again at 19, I felt something I hadn't experienced before. Freedom. Because this time, I wasn't going to beg. This time, I wasn't going to stay. This time, I was going to walk away and build an empire that would make them realize exactly what they threw away. My name is David Henderson. And I am the family disappointment. Not because I failed. Not because I was reckless or cruel or stupid. I was the disappointment because I existed in Mary's shadow, and in our family. There was only room for one star. My sister Mary is 3 years younger than me. She has our mother's delicate features, blonde hair that catches light like spun gold, and a smile that makes people want to give her everything she asks for. More importantly, she has the one thing I never managed to develop. The ability to make our parents believe she can do no wrong. I look like my father. Dark hair, serious eyes, a face that people say seems trustworthy but not particularly warm. My grandfather used to say I had his build, solid and dependable, the kind of man you'd want beside you in a crisis. But my grandfather died when I was 15, and with him went the only person who ever looked at me like I mattered. Growing up in the Henderson household meant understanding your role. Mary was the beloved princess. I was the dependable workhorse. Our parents, Richard and Patricia Henderson, had built their lives around maintaining appearances in Connecticut's elite social circles. My father inherited Henderson Industries from my grandfather, a manufacturing company that made components for luxury automobiles. It wasn't flashy, but it was steady, profitable, and respected. Mary learned early that tears and charm could get her anything. I learned that results were expected but never celebrated. When Mary crashed her car at 16, drunk after a party, our parents paid off the other family and sent her to a luxury rehab center that was more spa than treatment. When I got a B+ in chemistry at 17, my father didn't speak to me for a week. When Mary dropped out of college after one semester, claiming the stress was affecting her mental health, our mother threw her a welcome home party. When I graduated summa cum laude with degrees in business and finance, my father's only comment was that it was about time I did something useful. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that actions would speak louder than words. I worked in the family business every summer since I was 16, learning every department from the factory floor to the executive offices. I studied our competitors, analyzed market trends, drafted proposals for expansion into electric vehicle components before anyone else was talking about it. Mary spent her 20s traveling Europe on the company credit card, posting photos on social media with captions about finding herself. But here's what I didn't understand in my previous life, what I only learned after I died and somehow woke up again as my 19-year-old self with all my memories intact. My parents didn't choose Mary because she was better. They chose her because she was easier. I asked questions. I pointed out problems. I challenged bad decisions. I made them think, and thinking made them uncomfortable. Mary agreed with everything they said. Mary made them feel wise and needed. Mary never made them confront their own limitations. In my first life, after they announced Mary would inherit the company, I had stayed. I convinced myself I could guide her. Protect the legacy my grandfather built. I became her chief operating officer, a fancy title that meant I did all the work while she took all the credit. For 9 years, I watched her make disastrous decisions. She hired her incompetent friends for key positions. She ignored my warnings about our biggest client planning to switch suppliers. She spent money on rebranding campaigns and luxury office renovations while our manufacturing equipment aged into obsolescence. I worked myself to exhaustion, trying to hold everything together. I had no life outside the office. No relationships. No hobbies. Just spreadsheets and damage control and the desperate hope that somehow, eventually, my parents would see what I was sacrificing. They never did. The week before my heart attack, Mary had presented my 5-year strategic plan to the board, claiming she'd developed it during a meditation retreat in Bali. She got a standing ovation. I got an email from HR asking me to train her new assistant. I died alone in my office at 3 a.m, clutching my chest, my phone just out of reach. The cleaning staff found me 6 hours later. At my funeral, which I somehow witnessed in that strange space between death and rebirth, 17 people attended. Most were employees obligated to show up. My parents spent the service on their phones, coordinating Mary's engagement party happening that evening. She was marrying Trevor Blackwood, heir to a hotel empire, in what the society pages called the wedding of the decade. Mary herself didn't attend my funeral. Too emotionally fragile, my mother explained to the handful of mourners. Then something impossible happened. I woke up in my childhood bedroom. 19 years old again, the morning of the day my parents would choose Mary over me. At first, I thought I was dreaming or hallucinating in my final moments. But the memories were too vivid, too detailed, too real. I had been given something I never expected. A second chance. Not to win my parents' love. I understood now that was impossible. They had made their choice long before this day, probably before I was old enough to remember. No, this second chance was for something better. To build a life where their approval didn't matter. To become successful not despite them, but completely separate from them. To prove that David Henderson didn't need the Henderson name to become somebody extraordinary. But standing in that lobby, listening to my father announce Mary's inheritance again, I felt a ghost of the old pain. The 19-year-old part of me that hadn't lived the future yet still wanted to hear my father say he was proud. Still wanted my mother to choose me, just once. That part of me was dangerous. That part of me could trap me here for another 9 years of slow destruction. So I did what I never managed to do before. I let it go. Congratulations, Mary, I said, and my voice sounded steady even though my hands were shaking. I'm sure you'll do great things. My father blinked, surprised. He had expected protest. In my previous life, I had protested. I had argued and presented my credentials and begged them to reconsider. David, my mother began, her tone suggesting she was about to offer some meaningless consolation prize. I'm moving out, I interrupted. Today. I'll be gone by evening. The silence that followed was profound. Mary's smile faltered. She had wanted to see me broken. My father's expression shifted to confusion. My mother actually looked hurt, as if my leaving was somehow a betrayal after they had just rejected everything I was. Don't be dramatic, my father said finally. You'll still work for the company. Mary will need your support. No, I said simply. I won't. And for the first time in my entire life, I walked away from them. I didn't look back. The problem with walking away dramatically is that you still have to figure out where you're walking to. I had packed one suitcase with clothes, my laptop, and the few things that mattered, my grandfather's pocket watch, some photos from before he died, my college textbooks. Everything else could stay. I didn't want anything that would remind me of who I used to be in this house. My bank account held $8,000 from summer jobs and birthday gifts from my grandfather's estate. In a city like New York, where I planned to go, that would last maybe 2 months if I was careful. I had no job. No connections outside my family's circle. No safety net. But I had something more valuable. I had 9 years of future knowledge and the memory of every mistake I'd made by being too afraid to take risks. I was loading my car when Sarah found me. Sarah Mitchell was my cousin on my mother's side, though we'd grown up more like siblings since her parents traveled constantly for work, and she spent most holidays and summers at our house. She was 21, sharp-minded, studying law at Columbia, and one of the few people in my extended family who had ever treated me like I mattered. In my previous life, Sarah and I had drifted apart after I stayed with the family business. She had tried to maintain contact, but I'd been too buried in work, too ashamed of my situation to let her see how bad things had gotten. You're really leaving? She said, leaning against my car. It wasn't a question. I'm really leaving. Your mother is inside crying. She's telling everyone you're having some kind of breakdown, that the pressure of expectations got to you. I laughed, though it came out bitter. Of course she is. Can't let people think she might have done something wrong. Sarah studied me with those intelligent hazel eyes. What happened to you, David? You seem different. Older somehow. I almost told her. The words were right there. I died. I came back. I know how this all ends. But even Sarah, who knew me better than anyone, would think I'd lost my mind. I just finally saw things clearly. I said instead. They were never going to choose me, Sarah. Not for the company, not for anything. I was wasting my time, hoping. So what are you going to do? Build something they can't take credit for. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. George Chen. He's a venture capitalist, one of my professor's former students. He spoke at a seminar last month about investing in undervalued opportunities. He said something that reminded me of you. I took the card. George Chen. In my previous life, that name had never crossed my path. What did he say? That the best investments aren't in people who've had everything handed to them. They're in people who've had to fight for every inch and learned to turn obstacles into advantages. She smiled slightly. You've been fighting your whole life, David. You just didn't realize you were in the wrong arena. Something tight in my chest loosened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. George is notoriously difficult. He turns down 99% of pitches. But if anyone can convince him, it's you. You're the smartest person I know, even if your parents are too blind to see it. After Sarah left, I sat in my car staring at George Chen's business card. In my previous life, I had been too afraid to strike out on my own. Too conditioned to believe I needed my family's name and resources. Too convinced that their rejection meant I wasn't good enough. But that David had died at 28, alone, and forgotten. This David was going to take the risk. I was halfway down the driveway when Mary ran out of the house. David, wait. Against my better judgment, I stopped. She approached my window, and I rolled it down. Up close, I could see the calculation in her expression. This wasn't concern. This was strategy. You don't have to leave, she said, her voice taking on that sweet, reasonable tone she used when manipulating people. I know you're upset, but we can work together. I'll need someone I trust running operations. No, thank you. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You're being childish. Where are you even going to go? You think you can make it without the family name? Without our connections? In my previous life, those words had haunted me. They'd kept me chained to a job that was killing me, convinced I was nothing without them. Now they just sounded pathetic. I guess we'll find out, I said. David. Her voice sharpened. If you leave like this, you'll embarrass the family. People will ask questions. They'll think something's wrong. There it was. The real concern. Not my well-being. Not our relationship. Just the appearance, the precious family image. Tell them whatever you want, Mary. Tell them I had a breakdown. Tell them I wasn't good enough. Tell them I was jealous. I don't care anymore. You're making a huge mistake. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw what I'd been too desperate to acknowledge before. Mary didn't hate me. That would require her to think about me as a person. To Mary, I was just a tool that was refusing to work properly, an inconvenience that might make her inheritance slightly more difficult. She had never seen me at all. Probably, I agreed. But it'll be my mistake. Not yours. Not theirs, mine. I rolled up the window and drove away. In my rearview mirror, I saw Mary standing in the driveway, her phone already out. Calling our mother, probably. Or Trevor, her fiancé in this timeline too, apparently. Some things hadn't changed. That was fine. Let them talk. Let them create whatever narrative they needed to feel better about their choices. I had a meeting to prepare for. George Chen's office was in Manhattan, in one of those sleek buildings where even the elevator smelled expensive. I had called ahead, used Sarah's name, and somehow gotten an appointment for the next afternoon. 24 hours to prepare a pitch that would determine whether I had a future or just a dramatic exit with nowhere to go. I spent that night in a cheap hotel, surrounded by notes and projections, building a presentation that would show George Chen exactly what I could do. I had died once already. I had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. This time, I was going to bet on myself. The night before meeting George Chen, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring at the water-stained ceiling of the hotel room, listening to traffic outside and voices from adjacent rooms bleeding through thin walls. This was my reality now. No mansion bedroom with custom furniture. No housekeeper bringing breakfast. No safety net of family money. Just me, $8,000, and a pitch that had to be perfect. The panic came in waves. What if I was wrong? What if my memories of the future were somehow flawed, distorted by the trauma of dying? What if I'd walked away from everything for nothing? In my previous life, I had spent 9 years trapped by fear of this exact moment. Fear of being alone. Fear of failing without my family's resources. Fear of discovering that maybe my parents were right, maybe I really wasn't capable of succeeding on my own. That fear had killed me just as surely as the heart attack. I got up, paced the small room, and forced myself to think rationally. Yes, I was terrified. Yes, this could all fail spectacularly. But I had already lived the alternative. I had already experienced what happened when I played it safe, when I accepted crumbs and called it loyalty. That path led to a funeral with 17 attendees and a sister who couldn't be bothered to show up. This path, terrifying as it was, at least belonged to me. I pulled out my laptop and reviewed my presentation again. I wasn't pitching some vague startup dream. I was pitching something specific, something I knew would work because I'd watched the market evolve over 9 years. Electric vehicle components. Specifically, battery, thermal management systems. In my previous life, Henderson Industries had missed this opportunity entirely. Mary had dismissed my proposals, thinking electric vehicles were a fad. By the time the market exploded, we were years behind competitors, scrambling to catch up with outdated technology and no expertise. But I knew which companies would dominate. I knew which technologies would become standard. I knew where the bottlenecks would be and what solutions would work. More importantly, I knew that George Chen had made a fortune betting on electric vehicle infrastructure early. Sarah had mentioned it during her story about his seminar. If I could convince him I understood the market, that I had insights worth investing in, I might have a chance. The presentation had to show 3 things: technical knowledge, market awareness, and the hunger to execute. George Chen didn't invest in ideas. He invested in people who would do whatever it took to succeed. I could be that person. I had to be. Around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "David, please come home. We can discuss this like adults. You're throwing away your future over hurt feelings. Don't be foolish." I stared at the message for a long time. In my previous life, this was the moment I would have caved. The moment doubt would have crept in, whispering that maybe I was overreacting, maybe I should give them another chance, maybe family was worth more than pride. But I wasn't that David anymore. I deleted the message without responding. Another text came through. This one from Mary. "Trevor and I are worried about you. You're not thinking clearly. Whatever job you think you're going to find, it won't compare to what you're giving up. Come back before you make this worse." I almost laughed. Trevor, her fiancé, didn't even know I existed beyond awkward holiday dinners. This was Mary's manipulation, using his name for weight. I deleted that message too. Then one more. From my father. "You're being selfish and immature. If you go through with this, don't expect to come crawling back when you fail. The Henderson name means something. Without it, you're nobody." There it was. The truth under all the polite disappointment. Without them, I was nobody. That message, cruel as it was, actually helped. It crystallized everything. My father genuinely believed I couldn't succeed without his name, his company, his approval. He believed it so completely that he didn't even question it. Proving him wrong was going to be satisfying in ways I couldn't fully articulate. I turned off my phone and finally slept. The next morning, I put on my best suit, the one I'd bought with my own money for college interviews. I reviewed my presentation one final time. I rehearsed answers to every possible question George Chen might ask. Then I stood in front of the mirror and gave myself the speech I wish someone had given me years ago. "You are not what they said you were. You are not the disappointment, the backup plan, the one who wasn't good enough. You are capable, intelligent, and driven. You have survived rejection by the people who should have loved you unconditionally. If you can survive that, you can survive anything. Now go prove it." My hands were shaking when I pressed the elevator button in George Chen's building. They were still shaking when the receptionist led me to his office. George Chen was 52 years old, though he looked younger. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and an expression that gave away nothing. His office was minimalist, just a desk, 2 chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He didn't offer his hand or waste time on pleasantries. "Sarah Mitchell says you're worth listening to. Sarah is one of the brightest students I've encountered in 20 years of guest lecturing, so I'm giving you 30 minutes. Convince me." 30 minutes. Everything depended on 30 minutes. I opened my laptop, pulled up my presentation, and began. I talked about the electric vehicle revolution that was coming. Not the hype, the actual technical challenges that needed solving. Battery thermal management, the systems that kept EV batteries from overheating or freezing, was the bottleneck everyone was ignoring. Existing solutions were expensive, heavy, and inefficient. I showed him designs for a new approach using phase change materials and advanced heat pipes. I showed him market projections. I showed him which automakers were struggling with this exact problem and had money to spend on solutions. Most importantly, I showed him that I understood not just the technology but the business, manufacturing partnerships, supply chain logistics, intellectual property strategy, the pathway from prototype to profit. George listened without interrupting. His expression never changed. I had no idea if I was winning him over or wasting his time. When I finished, he was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then he said, "Where did you learn this?" "I have a degree in mechanical engineering and business from Cornell. I've been studying the EV market for years." Not a lie, just not mentioning those years included a previous lifetime. "And your family?" "Sarah mentioned you come from money." "I did." Past tense. As of yesterday, I'm on my own. Why? This was the moment. I could give him some polished answer about seeking independence or wanting to build something myself. But George Chen hadn't built his fortune by accepting polished answers. Because they chose my sister over me for something I was better qualified to do, and I realized if I stayed, I'd spend my life making them look good while they treated me as expendable. I'd rather fail on my own than succeed as someone's assistant. George's expression finally shifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "How much do you need?" My heart stopped. "You're interested?" "I'm asking how much you need. Be realistic." I had planned for this. 500,000 for initial development and prototyping, another $1 million for manufacturing partnerships and first production run. I'm willing to give up 40% equity for $1.5 million in seed funding. 50% equity. George countered. 45, and I work for free until we hit profitability. George studied me. Then he extended his hand. "Deal. Welcome to the hardest period of your life, David. If you thought your family was tough, you haven't seen anything yet." I shook his hand, and despite his warning, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. George Chen was not exaggerating. He was, in fact, being generous. The first 3 months working under George were the most brutally difficult period of my life, and that included dying. He set me up in a tiny office space he owned in Queens, barely 200 square feet with flickering fluorescent lights and a heating system that worked occasionally. My title was founder and chief engineer, but my reality was doing everything myself: design work, supplier negotiations, regulatory research, financial projections, patent applications. George's investment came with conditions. He would release funds in stages, tied to specific milestones. Miss a milestone, lose the funding. Simple as that. "I'm not giving you money to waste," he said the day we signed contracts. "I'm giving you enough rope to either pull yourself up or hang yourself with. Which one happens is entirely your choice." Pie. He also insisted I document everything, not just for business purposes but for my own education. Every decision, every mistake, every lesson learned got recorded in detailed reports he actually read and annotated with feedback that ranged from helpful to devastating. "Your supplier negotiation was pathetic. You let them see desperation. Never negotiate from weakness. This design iteration is 60% there. The other 40% is lazy thinking. Try again. Your financial model assumes everything goes perfectly. Plan for disasters." It was exhausting. It was humiliating. It was exactly what I needed. Because unlike my parents, George was harsh because he expected me to succeed. Every criticism came with guidance. Every failure came with analysis of what went wrong and how to fix it. He wasn't trying to make me feel worthless. He was trying to make me better. I worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week. I learned to negotiate with suppliers who tried to take advantage of my age. I learned to iterate designs based on manufacturing constraints. I learned to pitch to potential partners with confidence even when I was terrified. Slowly, the prototypes improved. The business model solidified. The foundation for something real began to take shape. Then, for months in, everything changed. I was meeting with a potential manufacturing partner when I saw her. Mary. In Manhattan, coming out of a restaurant with Trevor and my parents. I froze. In my focused obsession with the work, I hadn't thought about them in weeks. Now, suddenly, they were 50 feet away, and all the old feelings came rushing back. Mary saw me first. Her eyes widened in shock, then swept over my off-the-rack suit and work bag with barely concealed disdain. She said something to Trevor, who looked in my direction with mild curiosity. My parents turned. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father's expression hardened. They walked over. I had nowhere to escape. "David," My mother's voice trembled. You look terrible. Are you eating properly? Where are you living? I'm fine. You're clearly not fine, my father said sharply. You've lost weight. You look exhausted. This nonsense has gone on long enough. Come home. I have a home. And a business. Mary laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. A business? David. Please. You've been playing entrepreneur for 4 months. It's time to stop embarrassing yourself and the family. Trevor, who I'd barely ever spoken to, added his unwelcome opinion. No offense, man, but startups fail 90% of the time. Your parents are offering you a real position. That's nothing to be ashamed of. Something inside me went cold and clear. You're right, Trevor, I said quietly. 90% do fail, but I'd rather take that risk than spend my life working for people who don't value me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting. I tried to walk past, but my father grabbed my arm. We're not finished. Yes, I said, pulling free. We are. My mother's eyes filled with tears. How can you be so cruel, after everything we've done for you? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. What exactly have you done for me? You fed and clothed me, which is the legal minimum. You sent me to good schools, which benefited your image. You gave Mary everything that mattered and expected me to be grateful for scraps. That's not love. That's just obligation. You ungrateful. My father started. I'm done, I interrupted. I'm done trying to earn something you were never going to give. I'm done watching Mary fail upward while I do the actual work. I'm done being the disappointment. Be well. Be happy with your choices, but leave me alone. This time, when I walked away, they didn't follow. I made it around the corner before my hands started shaking. The meeting was a disaster. I could barely focus. The manufacturing partner said they'd think about it, which, in business speak, meant no. I went back to the office and sat in the dark for an hour, wondering if I'd made a catastrophic mistake, wondering if my father was right, if I was going to fail and prove everything they believed about me. My phone rang. George. Sarah told me you ran into your family today. How bad was it? Of course, Sarah knew. She always knew everything. Pretty bad. I may have burned bridges permanently. Good. I blinked. Good. David, you're trying to build something while constantly looking over your shoulder at people who don't believe in you. That's like running a race with weights on your ankles. You needed that confrontation. You needed to choose yourself clearly and publicly. Now, the only direction you can go is forward. What if forward leads to failure? Then you fail and try something else. But at least you'll fail on your terms, not theirs. Most people never get that. They spend their entire lives seeking approval from people incapable of giving it. You're free of that now. Use it. After we hung up, I sat with those words. He was right. The confrontation, painful as it was, had severed something. Before today, some small part of me was still performing for my parents, still hoping they'd hear about my success and regret their choice. Now I knew the truth. They would never see me clearly. Mary would always be their favorite. They would always believe I needed them more than they needed me. Fine. I didn't need their regret. I just needed to succeed. I pulled out my design notes and got back to work. 6 months after starting, we hit our first major milestone. A completed prototype that worked, actually worked, better than existing solutions. George released the next funding round. Phase 2, he said. Now we find out if you can sell. The real work was just beginning. 3 years. That's how long it took to go from a prototype in a Queen's office to a company that mattered. Chen Thermal Systems, the name George insisted on despite my protests about credit, landed its first major contract with a mid-tier electric vehicle manufacturer in year 2. The system worked flawlessly. Suddenly, bigger companies were paying attention. By year 3, we had contracts with 2 of the top 5 EV manufacturers globally. Revenue hit 30 million. My 45% equity was worth something real. Not billionaire money yet, but enough to prove I'd been right. George started stepping back, letting me run operations fully. You don't need me hovering anymore, he said. You know what you're doing. Sarah, who had just finished law school, joined as our general counsel. Someone needs to make sure you don't get screwed in negotiations, she said with a grin. You're brilliant with technology, but you still trust people too much. She wasn't wrong. The company grew. We hired engineers, built a real R&D facility, moved headquarters to a building that didn't smell like mold. I was 25, CEO of a company valued at over 200 million, and working harder than ever. I loved every minute. I also never thought about my family. Occasionally Sarah would mention something she'd heard. Henderson Industries was struggling. Mary had broken her engagement to Trevor. My parents were fighting with the board. I listened politely and felt nothing. They had made their choice. I had made mine. We were even. Then the merger offer came. Blackwood Automotive, Trevor's family company, wanted to acquire Henderson Industries. The Hendersons were desperate enough to consider it. But Blackwood had conditions. They wanted Henderson's manufacturing facilities but not the outdated technology or incompetent management. The deal was structured as a humiliating takeover disguised as a merger. My parents would lose control. Mary would lose her position. The Henderson name would disappear. I learned all this from Sarah, who heard it through legal circles. The Blackwoods are offering pennies on the dollar, she said. It's a fire sale. Your parents are about to lose everything. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt nothing. That's unfortunate, I said, returning to the engineering report I was reviewing. David, they're your family. Biologically. Sarah was quiet for a moment. What if they ask for your help? They won't. That would require admitting I was right and they were wrong. They'd rather lose everything. I was wrong about that. 2 weeks later. My mother called. The first time I'd heard from her in 3 years. David, sweetheart, how are you? I've been reading about your company. We're so proud of you. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. What do you want? Can't a mother call her son? Not after 3 years of silence, no. What do you want? Her voice shifted, losing the fake warmth. We're in trouble. Mary made some poor decisions, the board lost confidence, and now we're facing a hostile takeover. We need help. I see. There's a board meeting next week, where they'll vote on the Blackwood offer. If you could attend, speak on Mary's behalf, explain that she has support from other successful business people, it might change minds. You owe us that much. I owe you. We raised you. We gave you every advantage. This is your family legacy being destroyed. No, I said calmly. It's Mary's legacy being destroyed. You gave it to her. What she did with it is her responsibility. David, please. Now she was crying. If this goes through, we'll lose everything. The house. The savings. Everything is tied to company stock. We'll be ruined. You should have thought about that before putting all your assets in one basket managed by someone unqualified. How can you be so cold? I learned from the best. Goodbye, Mother. I hung up. 10 minutes later, Mary called. I hope you're happy, she hissed. This is what you wanted, isn't it? To see me fail. Mary, I haven't thought about you in years. Your failure has nothing to do with me. Liar. You've been waiting for this. Probably sabotaged me somehow. You sabotaged yourself. You ignored good advice, hired incompetent friends, chased trends instead of building sustainable value. I know because I wrote those warnings in reports you never read when I worked there in another life. I caught myself. I know because that's what bad leaders do. If you don't help us, we lose everything. The company. The house. The reputation. Mom and Dad will be destroyed. Then they'll finally understand how it feels to lose something that matters. You're a monster. No, Mary. I'm just not your safety net anymore. Figure it out yourself. I hung up on her too. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from guilt, from restless energy. Something was unfinished. The next morning, I did something I swore I wouldn't. I looked up Henderson Industries' financials. They were public record since it was a pending merger. It was worse than I thought. The company was hemorrhaging money. Mary had signed terrible contracts. Overinvested in vanity projects, let quality control slip until major clients left. The Blackwood offer was insulting, but it was the only offer. Without it, Henderson Industries would collapse completely in 6 months. My parents had tied their retirement funds, their house, everything to company stock. When the merger went through at the proposed price, they'd be left with almost nothing. I stared at the numbers for a long time. They deserved this. They had made every wrong choice and refused every warning. This was consequences, pure and simple. But something George had said years ago kept echoing in my mind. Revenge is expensive, David. It costs you more than it costs them because you have to carry it. Success is cheaper. Just live well and let them wonder what they missed. I had succeeded. Chen Thermal Systems was thriving. I had proved everything I needed to prove. Watching my parents suffer wouldn't add anything to that success. It would just mean I was still letting them dictate my emotional state, still giving them power they didn't deserve. The Henderson family board meeting was in 4 days. I made a decision. Not for them. For me. To close this chapter permanently and completely. I called the Blackwood negotiation team and arranged a meeting. 2 days later, I sat across from Trevor Blackwood in his family's corporate office. He looked older. More tired than when I'd last seen him with Mary. David Henderson, he said with a cold smile. Come to beg for your family? No. Come to make you an offer. I slid a folder across the table. Chen Thermal Systems will acquire Henderson Industries' manufacturing facilities and technology patents for 3 times what you're offering. In exchange, Henderson Industries stays independent, under new management, and your family gets first option contracts on all future thermal management systems we develop. Trevor flipped through the documents, his expression shifting from smug to calculating. Why would you save them after they rejected you? I'm not saving them. I'm buying assets that have strategic value to my company. What happens to the former management after the sale is their problem. Your parents will still lose control. Yes. And your sister? The sale contract requires complete leadership restructuring. Mary will be removed from any operational role. Trevor leaned back. So you're destroying them while pretending to help? Brutal. I like it. I'm making a business decision that happens to prevent the Henderson name from disappearing entirely. Take it or leave it. He took it. The board meeting was chaos. My parents were stunned when I appeared. Mary looked hopeful until she heard the terms. I presented the offer clinically. Chen Thermal would acquire key assets, keeping Henderson Industries alive but restructuring entirely. Current leadership would be removed. The Henderson family would retain minority shares worth enough to preserve their financial security but no operational control. You're stripping us of everything we built. My father said, his face red. No. I'm buying what grandfather built and stopping you from destroying it completely. You can accept this deal and maintain comfortable lives, or reject it and lose everything in 6 months when you file bankruptcy. Your choice. The board voted unanimously to accept. After the meeting, my mother approached me, crying. How can you do this to us? I looked at her, this woman who had never once chosen me. Who had watched me work myself to death in service of her favorite child and never said thank you. I'm doing exactly what you taught me, I said. I'm making the smart business decision without letting emotions get in the way. Isn't that what you always said? I walked out of the Henderson Industries headquarters for the last time. Sarah was waiting in the car. How do you feel? She asked. Free, I said. And I meant it. 5 years later, Chen Thermal Systems went public. The IPO was the most successful tech offering of the year. My 45% stake was suddenly worth $3.2 billion. At 30 years old, I was a billionaire. The business press loved the story. Self-made entrepreneur who built an empire from nothing. They didn't know about the rebirth. About the second chance. About the lifetime of mistakes I'd learned from. They just saw the results. George Chen, who had taken a chance on an angry 19-year-old with a pitch and a dream, made $400 million from his shares. He retired to travel the world with his wife, finally taking the time he'd deferred for decades. You did this, I told him at his retirement party. You gave me the foundation. I gave you capital and guidance, he corrected. You did the work. Don't forget that. Sarah became our chief legal officer and the third largest individual shareholder. She had guided every major negotiation, protected every patent, and saved us from a dozen potential disasters. She was dating a brilliant software engineer she'd met at one of our industry conferences and seemed genuinely happy. Remember when you were sleeping in that terrible hotel, convinced you'd made a catastrophic mistake? She said, champagne in hand. Look at you now. I looked around the celebration, at employees who had become friends, at a company that had revolutionized an industry, at a life I'd built completely on my own terms. It was everything I'd dreamed of and more. But there was one piece of unfinished business. After the Henderson Industries acquisition, my family had faded into quiet obscurity. They lived comfortably on dividends from their minority shares, but the power, the prestige, the social standing were gone. Mary worked a mid-level marketing job at a company that didn't know or care about her family name. My parents had moved to a modest house in the suburbs. Their mansion sold to pay debts. I never contacted them. They never contacted me. Until the day I received an invitation to my grandfather's legacy foundation gala. The foundation had been established by my grandfather to support engineering students from underprivileged backgrounds. After his death, my parents had largely ignored it, doing the bare minimum to maintain appearances. Now the foundation board, which I'd quietly been supporting financially for years, was honoring me as their keynote speaker and largest donor. The event was at the same hotel where my parents had held countless social functions during my childhood. The ballroom where I'd watched them parade, merry around like a prize while I stood in corners, invisible. I almost didn't go. Sarah convinced me. You've won, David. Completely and totally. Go let them see exactly what they lost. So I went. The room was filled with people I'd grown up around. Connecticut elite who had watched my parents choose Mary. Who had whispered about my dramatic departure. Who had probably assumed I'd fail. Now they lined up to shake my hand, congratulate me, pitch me their investment opportunities. I was gracious. Professional. Everything they had never believed I could be. My parents arrived late, clearly uncomfortable. They had aged dramatically. My father's hair had gone completely gray. My mother looked diminished somehow, the confident socialite replaced by someone uncertain of her place. Mary came with them, wearing a dress that was nice but not designer. She looked tired. They saw me on stage during the keynote speech. I talked about my grandfather. About his belief that talent existed everywhere, but opportunity didn't. About how the foundation he created had changed thousands of lives by giving brilliant young people a chance they wouldn't have had otherwise. My grandfather taught me that success isn't about where you start, I said. It's about what you do with the chances you're given, and what you do when chances are denied. He taught me to build rather than inherit. To earn rather than expect. To value people for their work, not their name. I saw my father's jaw tighten. This foundation represents his values. Hard work. Merit. Genuine achievement. It's a legacy worth protecting. I paused. Unlike some legacies, which turned out not to be worth the paper they were printed on. The room erupted in applause. They thought I was talking about business generally. My parents knew better. After the speech, I was surrounded by admirers, business leaders, politicians, academics. People who mattered. People who wanted my time. My insight, my money. I watched my parents standing at the edge of the room, looking at the son they had dismissed, now the center of everything they had once craved. My mother approached first. My father and Mary hung back. David, that was a beautiful speech. Your grandfather would be so proud. Thank you. You've accomplished so much. We always knew you were capable. The lie was so audacious I almost admired it. No. I said quietly. You didn't. You told me I was nothing without the Henderson name. You told me I'd fail. You chose Mary for everything that mattered and expected me to be grateful for whatever scraps were left. Her face crumpled. We made mistakes. We see that now. But you're still our son. Doesn't that count for something? It did. For 19 years, it counted for everything. I would have done anything for your approval. I met her eyes. Then I learned to live without it. That's the greatest gift you ever gave me. The gift of knowing I didn't need you. David, please. We're family. No. We're related. Family is people who choose you, support you, believe in you. George was more of a father in 3 months than Dad was in 19 years. Sarah was more of a sister than Mary ever was. You don't get credit for biology when you failed at everything else. My father, unable to stay silent, stepped forward. You've made your point. You succeeded. We were wrong. Is that what you want to hear? Fine. We underestimated you. But this vindictiveness, this cruelty, you're better than this. I laughed. Actually laughed. I'm exactly what you made me. You taught me that sentiment is weakness. That business is business. That people are resources to be used or discarded based on value. I learned those lessons perfectly. The only difference is I'm better at applying them than you were. Mary finally spoke, her voice small. Do you hate us that much? No, I said honestly. I don't hate you at all. I don't feel anything. You're just people I used to know who made bad decisions that hurt them more than me. I don't wish you harm. But I don't wish you anything. You're irrelevant. That landed harder than any insult could have. Security approached, telling me the car was ready. I had a flight to Tokyo for a business meeting in the morning. Enjoy the gala, I said. The foundation does good work. Maybe donate if you're feeling generous. I walked away. Sarah was waiting by the exit. How did it feel? Like closing a book I finished reading years ago. Satisfying but not as dramatic as I expected. That's growth. That's perspective. We stepped out into the cool night air. The city stretched before us, full of lights and possibilities. My phone buzzed. A message from George. Currently somewhere in Southeast Asia. Saw the foundation gala coverage. Proud of you. Not for the success, that was inevitable. For knowing when to walk away. That's wisdom. I smiled. Behind me. In the ballroom, my parents watched through the windows as I got into a car probably worth more than their house. They would go home to their modest suburban life, diminished and forgotten, living off the scraps of a legacy they had squandered. I would go to Tokyo, then London, then back to headquarters where brilliant people were solving problems that mattered. They had chosen Mary. They had rejected me. They had told me I was nothing without them. And I had proven them wrong in every possible way. Not through cruelty or revenge, though I could have destroyed them completely. But through something more powerful. Indifference. They had become so irrelevant to my life that their suffering or success affected me equally. Which is to say, not at all. I had won not by beating them, but by building something so far beyond their comprehension that they couldn't even see the heights I'd reached. In my previous life, I had died seeking their approval, alone and forgotten. In this life, I lived on my own terms, surrounded by people who chose me. Building things that mattered. Free from the weight of their disappointment. I was David Chin now, not David Henderson. I had a family I chose, a legacy I built, a future I controlled. The boy who stood in that mansion lobby at 19, hearing he wasn't good enough, was gone. In his place stood a man who knew his worth. And that man had everything he needed.